The session will introduce ourselves, but, just before that, I also wanted to say that this is not going to be one of the sessions where you have these bullet points of how to publish. But I think we're trying to make it, like we said, in our proposal or the title, dilemmas and suggestions. So we're trying to have a conversation and make this more dialogic and interactive. And we also have a little, I don't know whether we should call activity, it sounds very preschool, but some kind of a, where we are going to be giving you some flashcards, and, we would like to know your maybe experiences with publishing, and if you have any questions that, you think we might be able to answer. So we'll do that a little bit to make it more interactive. We do have some questions for you and for us as well to be, engaging with together collaboratively, but it would be great to also get some of your suggestions and comments and remarks about publishing from the Global South and semi-peripheries more generally. Okay, so with that, I am Tannistha Samanta, and I think I introduced myself a little bit in the morning session. So I'm an associate professor, the Department of Sociology at Flame University in India. It's a liberal arts school primarily. And my primary area of research is actually in aging studies or social gerontology, for that matter. And I look at intersections of age, gender, and sexuality, and also kind of, trying my hand of theory building coming from the South, something that, we'll talk as part of the session as well. So, and I also write for the medium. I do a little bit of, film reviewing for certain magazines which use a sociological lens. So, I don't do film studies, if you know what I mean, but I definitely very interested to see what happens when, sociology goes to the cinemas. And I think it's a very exciting, field, and I draw a lot from these kind of other, I would say, modes of doing sociology other than the academy. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Tannistha. I guess my microphone is working, right? You can hear me. Well, first, before everything, I have to say I feel a bit uncomfortable to be here with the microphone. I feel like I'm a famous person or something. I would prefer to be around, have more interaction with you, but I'm sure we will make it work. I'm Demet Gülçiçek. I'm an assistant professor at Munzur University, which is a university in the eastern part of Turkey, so in the Kurdish part. I'm also an honorary researcher at the University of Warwick, so mostly I'm based in Turkey, but I have some connections here, which will be relevant with the publishing from the semi-peripheries part that we will be talking about in a bit. Also, I am in the board of a foundation called @Gender. Anyone who heard of @Gender before? Okay, it's like European Sociological Association, but focusing on gender stuff. We have a conference upcoming in the end of the month. If you want to check it out, you can have a look. Also, we have regular conferences for the following years as well. As I said, I've been in the board of @Gender in the last 5 years, I think. And we've been organizing something called ECR events for a while. So some activities, some places we were trying to create for early career researchers, especially in relation to publication, but not exclusively. So my part of this workshop today will be mostly based on what we were doing for @Gender in the last years, and my own experiences as an early career researcher as well. So I want to include both the strategies that worked for me and the heartbreaking parts, like rejections and feeling isolated, that sort of stuff will be leading me today. And maybe we can mention to Maria as well, because the creation of this workshop was in the following way. Dear Maria Domar Pereira, who is a feminist scholar based at the University of Warwick, and I wanted to have this workshop together. And then Tannistha reached out to us, and she said she was trying to do something similar, so why don't we collaborate and do the work together. Maria is unfortunately not here, but she sent her love, so she has her voice in the workshop today as well. Yeah.
Thanks. So, so before we get started, we have a little bit of, if you can call this an activity or by any stretch of imagination, and we have these flashcards. If you would like to maybe write something on them, and we could, at the end of the Q&A, we would like to look at them, and probably we would have answered some of those questions. But if there are new questions, we would like to kind of engage with those questions more collaboratively. And, a little bit before we get into what we want to do as part of this session, we have mentioned semi-peripheries, global south, but, and I think both of us agree that, even these are categories, and we are aware of that, but we're doing it for the purpose of this particular session. But we are using these categories of semi-periphery, periphery, or global south, north as dynamic, political, and at the same time subversive categories, right? So, I just wanted to put that out that we are critical of the category of global south, periphery, or semi-periphery, but at the same time, for the purpose of the discussion, I think it's useful to have something which is a common kind of a lexicon and maybe more recognized in scientific community. So, okay, so. Demet, do we kind of go around the room maybe? Do you want to maybe introduce yourselves? Be happy to share my mic with you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ulla McKnight. I'm based at the University of Sussex, about a year and a half in on my first permanent position. And yeah, I would just like to learn more about the process of publishing, especially in situations where networks and connections with people are not that strong. Limited experience with publishing. I find it quite tricky, obviously, for many reasons, but yeah.
So I'm Krisha. I'm just finished my PhD. That echoes a bit, annoying me a bit. My PhD at Kent, and I currently work at Swansea University. I think what attracted me to this session was, although I've published a bit throughout my PhD, I'm always interested in learning more and being challenged as well. And my publication experience, I've obviously always been based in the UK. I'm very aware that a lot of the work I do, because I kind of do sociology of religion, although I'm in a very UK context, again, I want to be challenged. I want to find out more and be challenged myself, basically.
Hi, I'm Katrine Callender. I'm down from University of Kent, doing part lecturing, but still to complete my PhD, kind of about halfway through, so lots of analysis. I have done some publication, but my work is not necessarily linked to the global south, but in terms of peripheries, in terms of disability, what is sociological, what is anthropological, so both in terms of methodologies, the interdisciplinary, and I think that's where I was attracted to the session in looking at those peripheries and what actually happens when we look at terminology from different spheres, when we look at kind of underlying principles from different spheres, and when they combine, but has the potential to explore some of the complexities when we step outside our designated little boxes, whether that's kind of our field or but it does sometimes make it challenging in terms of publishing. Because where do you fit if you actually go in and kind of and broaden over those boundaries? So that's kind of an aspect I think will be interesting to explore.
Hi, my name is Jessica Horn. I'm also based at Sussex in the business school. I'm really looking forward to learning about different ideas around publishing and also reaching broader audiences, not just academic audiences. In terms of my publication experience, I'm still sort of learning the process of publishing, but I'm quite interested in kind of discussing in a bit more depth feminist citational practice and what that means for power and equities in academia. But thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen O'Reilly. I'm a Emeritus Professor of Sociology at Loughborough University, but a trustee of the Sociological Review. So I'm here today because I still want to learn how to do things better. I have a lot of experience of publishing and being on editorial boards. I may be able to bring some insights today, but it'd be also really cool if we can learn how to do things better as well.
Hi, I'm Hu Yuan. I'm a PhD student from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I think I haven't had publication experience yet, and I'm preparing for my first paper for a special issue. So I hope to learn some experience from senior researchers in this conference. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, this is Alex. I'm currently a lecturer at the University of Leeds in the School of Sociology and Social Policy under a term fixed contract which will end this October. And because I was too busy focusing on teaching things, so the publication is somehow postponed and not that good. So it's quite challenging at the moment for me to seek or secure a new position. It's a tough period for me. And I got this session because I just experienced some very bad things while trying to get one journal article be published. Reviewer, probably a scholar based on China studies, comment on my article without mentioning anything related to the evidence or the quality of my article, but make comments on my political points of view. It's quite annoying, and I found this really difficult because I'm doing some Chinese sociology of ethnicity, race, inequalities, and citizenship things, which are all sensitive under the Chinese context. So I'm trying to switch my publication strategy from targeting some Chinese-focused journals to some more general sociological journals. That's why I'm here and want to find some suggestions, and thank you.
Hi, my name is Julia. I'm currently based at Queen Mary in London. The reason I'm here, I think it's because I have been spending lots of time with my students thinking about processes of knowledge production from the peripheries and issues of visibility and invisibility and what becomes legitimized in many ways as discourse that is valid. And I thought this session was perfect to think about those questions.
Hi, I'm Martine. I'm from Roskilde University in Denmark. I teach students too, and one of the things they really want to be better at bringing together form and matter. So in that sense, trying to not fit everything into a certain form, and trying to work with, if you look at this subject, what kind of form should this subject have? And I think this is something that is not viewed as valuable in academia. And my own experience is that I published my PhD as little signs or scenes with a anarchist publishing house in Denmark. And that was very interesting to have that experience. And my colleagues were like, why are you doing that? And I was like, because it's fun, and the students were really with me. But I found that my colleagues were like, will not give you points at university. And I was like, that is not important for me. And so for me, it's also interesting to hear the dilemmas you find in what the neoliberal university really wants you to do, and what you find fun, and what you really find gives your research meaning. And I mean, I published my PhD where I did an experiment. My name is Martine, and if you erase the E, it's a male name. And I researched gender within journalism in Denmark. And so I tried to just like move the E a little bit away so it actually looked like it was a man who did the PhD. And that was one of the things we talked a lot about in my PhD defense. But that was a way to try to publish in another way, because also to make a discussion out of how can you push the boundaries and make a talk about it. I'm not just a scientist publishing something. The name and the identity really matters, and we can see it every time. Yeah, they do reports on it. Yeah, sorry for talking so long.
Oh, wow. I'm José. I'm from Brazil, so I grew up there, and I did all my undergrad there. Oh, pretty much all. And then I came to Europe every now and then, and my graduate studies were in Europe. And when I reached my PhD, I did have some publishing experience in Brazil. It was very chaotic, I would say. I mean, I took my undergrad thesis and I submitted like a 30-page paper to a very fancy journal for Brazilian standards. And they told me, yeah, very good idea, just cut everything and then you have, yeah. And then they gave me like proper feedback and so on, but and I realized that when I have an idea and I can't sell it in the West, I turn to Brazil and they really help me out. So, and they are helpful in the sense that not only they give me feedback, but they really, I mean, they might not publish it quite the way I want, but they give me feedback, they push me forward. And there is this sort of a funny idea, like, oh, you're lost somewhere, but one day you come back to us, and we work with the same, topics, more or less. We are interested in the same. We are interested in Brazil, so there is this idea that, that's my experience with the semi-periphery. Let's say Brazil is, I don't know if it's considered semi-periphery yet. It's still all right. Go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Karen Runciman. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Edinburgh, a visiting associate professor at the University of Johannesburg, where I worked for more than 12 years prior to joining Edinburgh, and I'm also one of the editors of the Sociological Review. So one of the reasons that I'm here is kind of reflecting both on my experience of working for a long time in the Global South as a Global North trained scholar, and sort of understanding the inequities of global higher education systems. We don't all work in the same higher education system, and I think often within the core, if we can conceptualize it that way, that is not well understood. Just the basics around, do you have access to the literature? Do you have a stable electricity supply to be able to write your articles? These are real structural barriers, and that's even before we get to that there is, the hidden curriculum around how Anglophone journal articles are written, which, is implicitly taught in the core and has to be learned, I think, from the periphery. And I know as a journal editor, one of the questions that we get asked at every single editorial board meeting since I've been a member is, why do we not see more submissions coming through from the Global South? And since I became an editor 6 months ago, I'm beginning to get some insight to that, which I could obviously speak much more at length, but I won't take up that time now. So in a sense, what I'm hoping to get from this discussion is thinking through the difficulties of the real and structural barriers that no one journal can overcome, but how, what can we do as a journal to try and make that pathway into, as a sort of narrowly for me, publishing in the Sociological Review, but also more broadly. And maybe the last thing I did want to add, I think one of these inequities is also about what counts as scholarship. And so what I did when I lived in Johannesburg, the things that I did much more of that activity that was not conventional academic publishing was counted as scholarly work. And now within the UK, there's a very narrow boundary of what counts and where you publish what counts. And that's another structural barrier that is a difficulty. Thanks, Karen.
Hello, my name is Chi. I am based at the University of East Anglia, and I'm originally from Brazil, so I'm interested in the discussion of publishing from the Global South, semi-peripheries. I have a quote from a reviewer that I want to read to you. If this was an academic essay, I would give it a mark in the 50s and would comment on its lack of passion and specificity, particularly in the first 2/3 of the paper. It reminded me a little of an essay of one of my postgrad students wrote 30 years ago, at the end of which I wrote, "This is so thin, it is almost transparent."
It should be the famous reviewer 3 that we all got that feedback.
That was
it
reviewer
2?
1 and the only one. Okay. Not wonderful experience, is it? I think we have to reflect maybe on language barriers and, as everyone has been talking about, like the structure of the academic article in English, but also how sometimes we're not able to get a visa to travel to a conference. It happened to me to the US, American Sociological Association. I wasn't able to go because I couldn't find a slot for a visa to go to the US. So just to reflect on how some of these power relationships don't allow us to thrive the same way. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Patricia Jimenez. I'm based in Paderborn University in Germany, and I'm like honorary research associate in Cardiff. I guess one of the things I was hoping to get out has to do with, I finished my PhD last year, and I haven't published that much, and I feel like I don't do mainstream sociology, and it's been very difficult to find the space, and especially as an early career researcher with the pressure of having to publish in highly rated journals to secure future employment, and it just feels like a betrayal to my own values as an academic. And I guess, yeah, my question is how to cope with that, how to, let go on the one hand of your ideas, because I guess I'm very precious and I want to mature them. And if it was up to me, maybe I would just write 2 really good pieces and that's it. But that's not the system we work. So how to navigate that and compensate that. And I guess on the other hand, as someone that belongs to the Global South as well, although I left it many years ago, but it's my hope and aspiration that one day I can be a bridge. So I guess it will be interesting to see what sort of notes I can gather for the future to fulfill a role like that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Louis. I'm studying in Germany in Marburg, but I'm just a master's student, so I'm more in a position to listen, understand, and learn in this workshop, I'd say.
I'm Sinead. I'm based at the University of Leeds. I think I'm in a similar boat as Patricia. I've finished my PhD and my postdoc, and during my postdoc I was doing more community organizing in the Global South as well, but while based in Europe. So wondering how to articulate what happens in those places for the European gaze is very bizarre, because you have to really reduce the complexity, and it's tedious as hell. So yeah, I think also this thing of how do you balance what your ethos is, our complexity when we're in the Global South or the global majority, the complexity of our lives, the complexity of society over there, and how do you, reduce it to, to kind of get other people to understand it and therefore not be in precarious situations, because I don't have an academic job, because I need to work to feed myself and house myself. So, yeah.
Well, thanks. Thank you, everyone. I want to have a coffee with all of you and talk about all of this stuff in detail, because I share some of the heartbreaking parts, bad comments, visa problems, neoliberal university stuff. So this is one of the things that we have in common, I guess. I think we will be covering many stuff that you mentioned too. And we will have additional comments as well. So if you feel like you want to talk about a particular issue a bit more, please just let us know and we will do so.
Yeah. So, so we talk about the challenges and we put challenges, within quotes because these are something which are hurdles that are, built just because we are geospatially located in a particular context, or studying subjects who remain invisible and not represented, and perhaps not taken seriously when we try to publish those stories in platforms which are, again, mostly in global north. I would also like to, and I'm sure, Demet also shares this particular idea that, it's not really about the global south and north binaries and, putting these two blocks, whether political or geographical or intellectual blocks in kind of opposition with each other. But I think what we're trying to do is to see how can we be more equal, democratic, and collaborative partners in this process of publishing. So, so it's not that there is some kind of a quarrel between these blocks, but there are structural inequalities, and which I think many of you already mentioned as part of your experiences of publishing, or just trying to say your own piece. And I think what we are trying to do here collaboratively is to see how to make the dialogue much more sharper and much more perhaps louder. So we'll do a little bit of a song and dance between these, and many of you have already indicated some of the points that we wanted to talk about. So one of the questions that have always animated my work, and I'm sure is something that motivates or inspires your research, especially if you're publishing on from regions and on peoples outside the outside the core, to use the core periphery kind of a nexus. But is that who really speaks for Global South? So who is our audience? And it's very interesting, and I'm sure all of you have experiences with this. And one of the things that I kind of borrow McLona's, of course, very tongue-in-cheek statement that the first world has knowledge and third world has culture, and hence, third world becomes this kind of a place where data or interviews and peoples, need to be extracted to create knowledge for the global north. And about this audience question, I think it's an important question that, especially as a woman of color, working from the global south and working on people and trying to understand, their everyday politics of just living in the global south. I think it's important to understand that who are we speaking for, and who is the one who is actually talking. And I remember it's very in a funny incident, and this is a little bit like trying to put this anecdote in the larger context of how I guess these hierarchies or these flows, the movements of knowledge production, kind of moves. I remember, as part of my work earlier this year, I was on a kind of a research gig in Germany, and one of my projects was looking at late motherhood. I work on reproductive politics as well, and I was looking at how Germany as a developed country, but very pro-natalist and governed by some of those ideologies, how motherhood is perceived. One decides to have a child in 40s and 50s using reproductive technologies and so on and so forth. And one of the people in the panel, where I was interviewing for this fellowship position, I got that position, so that's good. But she asked in a very quizzing way that, why are you interested in Germany? And of course, I had a very polite answer because I wanted to get that fellowship. But it's interesting because we know that the third world, so to speak, and I'm using third world as a political category, is the data mine almost, and it gets quarried by researchers, both from Global South and from the North. And I'm sure, if this question wouldn't have been asked if I was a white scholar, working on these kind of questions. But the fact that the power hierarchies of what constitutes knowledge have changed because a brown, woman is studying the challenges and difficulties and struggles of navigating and bargaining with patriarchy in a developed context. It's definitely going to make a few people uncomfortable. So I feel like this is and that was quite an innocuous question. I think a well-meaning question, but clearly of a political nature, especially for someone who's coming from the Global South. So the audience question, I think, is important. And I know that's one of you also talked about. Sorry, yeah, Demet.
Can I add something about audience?
Sure, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is a very relevant question for me as
Right.
well. I have similar experiences. And it's one thing to think about the audience during a conference, and it's another thing to think about your audience while you are writing a journal article or a book, right? Because we might have different audiences in our minds, different than what the reviewer or the journal expects. One of the challenges, this is the challenge part, right? Yeah, one of the challenges I am having shared experience, as I can see and as I know, is that because I'm writing something sociological about Turkey, I am constantly asked for more context, more, more stuff about Turkey. It could have been Iran, it could have been Peru, but it's the general conception is that if you are writing about a non-Western or non-Northern context, you are only talking about that context. So I know that I can be seen as an expert on Turkey, but about other stuff, it's not the case, which is a strange thing because in my mind, I'm writing about complexity, I'm writing about, agency, dilemmas occurring in feminist movements. So it can be relatable to anything, and I put an effort to write in that particular way. But constantly I'm asked for the context. When I see the word context, I started getting, a little bit uncomfortable now. Uncomfortable is a kind word I'm using right now. Asking about the context is one thing. And another thing is, even though some expertise on non-Western world is appreciated, there is still this certain perspective you are expected, right? As an example from Turkey, it's okay if you are writing about Kurdish issue in a particular way. It's okay if you are talking about, the Kurdish female warriors with the fashion sense or whatever, whatever sexy it looks to the Western perspective. So that's another challenge while writing. You, I, or we, many of us are trying to catch that perspective, but also not to, someone mentioned, not to lose that passion, not to lose the essence of what you are trying to do. I have some solutions about this as well, but this is the challenges we are talking about, so that's another thing. And finally, again, in relation to audience, another challenge that I see as a shared experience is the marginalization of some fields. So I got one very heartbreaking rejection a few years ago about for a journal article that I submitted, and I was advised to submit that to British Middle Eastern journal. So, that's your field, they are telling me and many other people, not, not the main sociological debates, but you can play in that field. That's one of the examples that's showing us how audience issue can be complicated. And maybe we can go to citation from here.
Yeah, so I think one of you mentioned citation, and this is a major issue because as I mean, I have some quotes from different authors because it has suddenly gained some attention for all good reasons about how it creates inequities and also kind of reifies certain inequities because I mean, and we have so I, along with two of my collaborators, we did this exercise which used machine learning to kind of mine more than 100,000 citations in medical sociology, public health, which is the kind of fields that I typically publish. And we found that it was very clear, and it has been clear for a long time, but we also wanted to do with social sciences because this kind of analysis primarily happens with physics and computer science and other forms of network analysis, but not so much in social sciences. And we found that, I don't have the results right now, but I can show it later, or if you're interested, I can share the work. That it's very interesting because the highest citations are also from scholars who are geographically located in global North universities. And we also saw collaboration networks between North and South. And when I'm using North and South, I'm using them, spatial locations of North and South. So even when there have been co-authors, we saw that the incidence of citation, or the likelihood of being cited in top journals, is higher for those articles where the global North scholar is the first author as compared to the global South scholar. So, so this is not just an exercise in speculation, and this is also not to say that there is this kind of a causal relationship between your geographical location and who gets cited, but it also points to the fact, even if one does not model other factors in. So I'm a quantitative researcher, which also perhaps is demonstrated by how I'm explaining this. But the fact that there are citation inequalities that exist, and that, and I think some of you already mentioned that for promotion, I'm talking about academic promotion and other professional development. Whether you like it or not, citation scores are important, and hence where you publish, with whom you publish, what networks you have, become very critical for your overall performance when appraisals come in, and they constitute an important component in your academic dossier when you're getting evaluated of how productive you are, right? So and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, how to kind of navigate this, because this is a reality, and whether we like it or not, we are all governed by the neoliberal logic of having high scores and numbers. And hence, this is not something that we can wish away. So how do we work with a system which is very much governed by the logic of numbers? But how do we do that in a much more compassionate and meaningful way? And then finally, a little bit on the Global North conferences. I think this is something that Demet and I think both discussed. Is that, and some of you already mentioned, which is great. And although there are conferences like this one, which is very sympathetic and genuinely, like I said in the morning, really trying to walk the talk in terms of inclusion and diversity, but just by being located in contexts, which are sometimes difficult to access, and the unequal visa regimes, conference costs, the location. The logic of panel formations, and that's why I kind of like this conference, because it really kind of disrupts that logic. And what I mean by logic of panel formations is that in most conferences that I go or attend or part of, it's usually the panels where Global South researchers are talking about marginalization of knowledge. So it's almost like speaking with each other, and we are speaking the same language, but we are not being heard, even though we are in a Global North platform. So ultimately it becomes unintentionally exclusionary, even if we are making it to some of these conferences. So how do we disrupt those panels simply by the notion of context? context or by the notion of the region that we're studying, can we disrupt these hierarchies and these, mix them up, not just in terms of context, but also in terms of epistemes, theory building, and empirical work. So, and I think that's one of the things we would like to see and do. And I know that at Gender does that, and Demet will talk about it later as well, where it kind of really, I think, collapses these established hierarchies, which are just convenient, formats to be followed in standard conferences. So, Demet, you wanted to add something, or we'll go to the next slide of the interest of time? Okay. Yeah, so I also wanted to quickly, point out that, while we talk about, decolonizing, and I spoke about it in the morning as well, that most global North conferences, or more conferences for that matter, kind of jump this decolonizing, bandwagon without even recognizing the fissures and the kind of a politics within, the South-South encounters. So, so this is just a quick, again, this is drawing from mostly medical sociology and public health and those kind of fields. So, but I'm sure it applies to many other disciplines as well. And so while we talk about the North and South, in terms of binaries or in terms of, as being these two dichotomous entities, I think it's useful to also recognize that there are also local elites, even in the global South, and institutions that instrumentalize these anti-colonial rhetoric to the advantage of, I wrote higher caste because this is primarily, coming from the scholarship of India, and which is of context that I'm more familiar with, and I primarily work, within that region. So, while it's an elite capture when we talk about the North and the South, but it's also an elite capture in terms of class, caste, and religion when we talk in terms of majoritarian politics, even within the global South. So I think it's important to recognize that these fissures and these hierarchies and this unevenness is not between the South and the North, but also within the South. So, I like, Ahmed's, where they argue about citation as being relational, as a feminist memory, is how we acknowledge our debt to those who came before, those who helped us find our way when the way was obscured because we deviated from the paths that we were told to follow. And I think I like that relational dynamic through which citation is understood. And this is quick, again, something that I spoke about in the beginning, but, we can talk about it later as well, how the global South becomes like a data, a gold mine of data, and it's being extracted. And so, what do we do about this datafication of this particular region? How do, knowledge gets produced, and who produces it? What knowledge becomes legitimate? So these kind of questions, and especially living in an era where of datafied cultures, I think global South as a data bank, or the datafication of people's lives, of their stories and their everyday, I think it's an important concern, especially when we're talking about these kind of hierarchies across globally. Okay, so now we are kind of quickly going to address some of the challenges. So we all know what the challenges were, right? We have all faced it in some way or the other, and we know that the path to publishing is not an easy one. It's quite thorny, and it's particularly, thorny when you come from and you write on certain peoples. So, so how can we call for an epistemic disobedience? How do we disrupt and how do we, change the logic of what we write and how we write? So we'll start with comparative cross-cultural work, and this is something many of the authors that I have read and I've studied and I follow talks about how when we think about research, even if you are representing, we carry this representational baggage when we come from a particular context. We are thought to be an authority, which is kind of nice. If people look back to me whenever there is a discussion on India or Bollywood, I can just say whatever it is because not many people in the room knows that. But the dark side of this representational burden is that I'm this kind of an I would say a marginalized authority. It's a very paradoxical position to occupy of writing and speaking and coming from a region which has remained at the periphery. So one of the ways to kind of turn that around, and this is not always possible, but something that I have done as part of my work, and the example that I gave earlier, is actually a comparative work between Germany and India. And I think it's important that, and this is not to say that, Global South scholars have to now go and kind of commit this intellectual genocide by extracting knowledge from the global north. It's not some kind of a revenge, but I think it's important that we be equal players. And also, and also perhaps carriers of this knowledge and creators of this knowledge as well. And I have found it personally very fulfilling to do this kind of comparative work. I've also done, India, Canada. Of course, the contexts are very dissimilar. And then, it's very interesting, especially to see how far the logic of culture takes you, really, and the limits of cultural relativism. So there are very interesting theoretical questions one could ask when you do this kind of comparative studies. So if you're, since some of you are still starting out to do, or get your hands dirty in research, I think it's, if possible, I know it's very much, again, dependent on funding calls and who is going to sponsor your work and all of that. But if it's possible, I think one of the way to kind of turn the tide is to also kind of participate in cross-cultural work and be an important agent of this change of this kind of being more equal partners in producing knowledge globally. Yeah, Demet, you want to add something?
I have an addition for this as well. Yeah, at this very point, like how to overcome the epistemic injustices, there are quite different ways. Cross-cultural work is one of them, and the way that I found for myself was the following. So I try to underline the theoretical relevance of my research more and more to be able to overcome this problem that we are having, as I said. So rather than, saying my research is about this particular place, particular period, particular journal, or whether, particular magazine, I try to, formulate the whole thing in the way that can be relevant to many people. So again, the example of complexity. Complexity is relevant to any topic, right? Any person, or some of the concepts that we are talking about, like neoliberal universities, right. It's relevant to anyone. So that underlining that relevance of theoretical contribution is one of the strategies that we can find, I think.
Right. Thank you. Also, increasing South-South dialogues, and I know that, we almost do that, but, and like I said, those kind of hierarchies exist within the dialogues, within the Global South, and there have been increasing recognition that this partnership, is constituted less of a shared ground, and it's also rather uneven. So, and I think the sociological review, I forget whether it's the talk, by Srila Roy, earlier this year, she talked about intimate dissonant intimacies, where, she kind of captured these unequal power relation between actually South African feminist scholars and Indian scholars, and how dissonant those, hierarchies were. So I think it's important we kind of harness these dialogues also in more equitable lines as we critique the larger kind of North-South differences. I also, so this is something that, I think Demet might also like to talk about a little bit, that, and I know that, there has been this question that what constitutes academic knowledge and what counts as academic knowledge, what lies outside the academy, and whether it's respectable to publish, blogs and or have podcasts. So increasingly, I think, which is a good kind of a churning that has happened in academia and also sociology more particularly, because I think it's a much more disruptive discipline than other disciplines, is that there are now various platforms where one could also publish their work and get heard. So which is a new development, I would say. And I think in the next slide we do have few of those that we know that are useful. So, for example, the Sociological Review magazine, of course, is very well recognized. The Context, which I don't have here, but Context is also the magazine of the American Sociological Association, and also it's very if you think in terms of the index scores, I mean, if that's something that is of concern, I think that's also very high. There's also Anthropology News, the American Anthropological Association, which also publishes kind of academic pieces, but not particularly using the academic language sometimes, which I think is quite empowering. The Sociological Research Online has started, and it's been there, and some of us have published, which is called the Beyond the Text. So it kind of calls artists, film makers. So very recently we have a piece out there where we actually made a video and talked about the utility of satire in academic, knowledge production. So I think these kind of experimental forms of writing is possible very much, which might not find their way into more standard, journal platforms. The Gender in Society has recently started these blogs, which is also, I think great. And I know from the Global South, so, again, while we are showing this kind of a montage of different alternative platforms, they have a, UK-centric, I would say an American-centric kind of focus, or at least they're located, and hosted by organizations in the global north. But there are also, I would say, competing collaborative platforms from the global south. For example, Doing Sociology is something that is increasingly becoming very popular. It's also a sociology blog, which is run by mostly by indigenous scholars from India and South Africa. And it's also kind of coming up and have gained traction, which also kind of shows that the waves might be shifting. So quickly going back to...
Can I add something else about this point as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny. I was thinking when you were talking, Tannistha, like 5-10 years ago, many of us were advised that we should publish book reviews because it's a nice way of entering the publishing area. So you would have a sense of academic writing and you would have the experience of publishing process. But most of the journals are not publishing book reviews anymore. We can talk about the reasons of that, but it's not as common at all. And in addition to the list Tannistha showed you, even though they don't have book reviews, most of the journals has different forms of non-article formats.
Right.
They are called different things. Like I've seen the name Third Space,
forums.
Yeah, definitely. Like thinkings sort of words. So they all name the thing differently, but especially in the beginning, I think it's a very nice way to not to follow the article format, but to try to write something academic or semi-academic, trying to say your arguments, trying to create a new format so you can go through the process. It also looks good on CV, which is another aspect maybe, but as far as the creative process, I think it's a very nice way of thinking about this academic writing in a, I don't want to say easier way because it's not easier, but in a less challenging way maybe. You can always send an email to the journals asking if they accept these formats. They are, in my experience, they are quite open to it, so it worth to try.
Right, and I think particularly I have found it very useful writing commentaries of ideas that do not have empirical material to back, because most journals in sociology require that, like you have empirical material to back some of the the theory that you're trying to provoke. But I think commentaries, opinion pieces, or forums, or these kind of thought pieces, which are now very much integrated within some of the standard journals, are also a way to start. So I think one of you said in that table, I'm forgetting the name, is that you would just like to write 2 pieces and be done. So I think it's a great way to start till you collect adequate material that counts as legitimate empirical material or thick description for anthropological and sociological journals.
And just last thing to add, regarding the empirical material, one of the most creative formats that I like is the research notes format.
Research
if
note,
you've
that's
heard
right,
of it. Yeah, so it's not a proper article, but it's a sort of systematized way of sharing your research, mostly the empirical part, but also it can be the thinking process as well. So that's another format to check.
Right,
out.
and all of these, come with the DOI numbers. So if that's of concern, and we know that, like we said, there is no way of wishing that away, because especially as early career researchers, these are important. And I have found it very, useful early in my career, writing some of those, because they count as, legitimate, articles. But yet, there are shorter pieces, and they take also less time, because you're not, especially if you're a qualitative researcher, you're not expected to go out to the field and do research and come back and report that as part of your work. But, within your month or so, you're able to churn an article out. So those are some of the ways, and I know that most journals have started that. So I think it's a good, movement in that direction. And you want to say something about situating your contribution? Maybe we can skip it. Right, yeah. So, so I think this is our kind of a final, slide. And this is also about some material that I think Demet has put together. And this is at gender, which is also something that, I think you would like to talk about a little bit, maybe because it kind of, upends some of the anxieties that, we have faced as part of the publishing process, Yeah,
as a more general start, as you can see, the first 2 links, there are quite a lot of email lists that you can see the general ideas, general news, but also news from the publication community, as in like special edits or whatsoever. I put the first one is the general one, second one is the genders one. So the second one is more gender-related, but you can find several email lists that share such news. The YouTube link is a great workshop by Maria Domar Pereira that I mentioned, and she's talking about publishing in a journal in a more concrete way. So we were, like today, we were talking about all the challenges, dilemmas in a more broader way, and she's very to the point in that video. So I recommend that. And the second one is about tips for publishing your first book. Again, today we were mostly talking about journal articles, but there are different formats based on what you want to do. The second video talks about the details of how to write a book proposal, how to maintain the process, and so on. If you want more, more resources, you can see these last 2 links as well.
Yeah, so we will, stop here, and we'll be happy to take questions. We do have a couple of other slides, of how to publish, but like I said, we don't want the session, to reduce the session into some bullet points, so that, and giving you this idea that, when you walk out of this room, you're all equipped to start writing an article and getting it published. So we don't want to feed into that illusion. But I think it would be nice at this point to kind of take some questions and we can share our own experiences. One of the things that I would also like to say, and this is again for early career researchers, and I have found it very useful, and I think in the plenary panel, it was also kind of announced. It's important, one of the ways to disrupt the elite capture, or one of the ways to kind of learn the peer review process, to kind of unpack what really happens behind the scenes, is also to get on the editorial boards. And there are now many journals which call for editorial assistance. Some of the journals board that I sit, or some of the journals that I co-edit, we have actually hired advanced doctoral students and postdocs as editorial managers. So which essentially I think does two things. One is it helps them to build a network, because you are the first responder in terms of communication with authors, both early career and seasoned authors. So that kind of expands the network, and also you're part of the peer review process, so you kind of know the do's and don'ts of how to get it published. So I think I would really encourage if you are part of if you're not yet part of any editorial board, there are always calls. I also find the academic Twitter to be very important, and for example, one of the questions that I typically get when we do sessions like is that where to get information sometimes, right? I mean, unless you're part of a network, where do you get the information and announcements of, say, postdoc opportunities or fellowships, or even, the opportunities that I just spoke about? And I have found, I'm not saying Twitter is like the best, or I mean, it has its own politics, but I think it has been, at least academic Twitter has been very useful for my purposes, and so especially in terms of calls and getting information, about fellowships and other kinds of opportunities, which I might not know unless I'm part of that network. So these are the two kind of quick things I wanted to put that out, before we take questions. But yeah. So any questions or concerns? Do you think like the questions that you started off with, or you were hoping, have been somewhat addressed? I have to say it is the process is frustrating. I mean, there is no two way about it. So, I mean, you can attend hundreds of these workshops, but, it is what it is. But of course, there are ways to make the process more joyful and not so frustrating. Yeah, sorry. I think you raised your hand? Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah, oh, okay. I managed to turn my PhD thesis into a book, and
congratulations.
And it was frustrating, at least a little bit. I mean, it took me a long time to find the right place. Right. But what I wanted, when you said like journals don't publish book reviews and so on, I found, because I'm working now on Central and Eastern Europe, so I found that the Slovenian Anthropological Society publishes a journal called Anthropological Notebooks. It's a very small and open access journal. And what happens is that people publish books and they send the books there to the book reviewer editor. So they have a list of books on their website just ready for people to order them. And they send the book to you at your place. And you can just get the book for free and review it for them. And, it won't be super visible. You won't get, but it's a way to get free books. And, it's in Slovenia, but it's legit, and it's nice. And if you go to Ljubljana, they have like a museum, an anthropological museum, and you can just walk around. So.
Well, that's nice. I mean, I really like the format of book reviews, especially for people who wants to think about a new book in a deep way, right? Rather than just, reading a book, citing it in your work, and then it's done. So it's a nice intellectual process for sure. I also have my PhD published as a book, and I tried to find, people who would be interested in doing that, and there were very few actually. And I've been told that, I shouldn't, how to put this, I shouldn't lose time for finding a reviewer for the book, for promotion. I should do other things. I didn't do any of them, but that was the general advice at least.
Yeah, I managed to find a PhD student in the UK, and then it's a book about sports, so Soccer and Society was interested in his perspective about the book. And I also managed to find someone in Brazil that's interesting, but then she's reviewing for this journal in Slovenia too, because this is the only two places I could find someone interested in reviewing the book.
Thank you so much for that. I thought it was really interesting. I think, I guess this might be more of a comment, but before I had a permanent position, the difficulty I faced was that I had to teach so much so that I could support myself that I didn't have time to write. So, I had all these ideas and all these things that I wanted to do. And it wasn't until I was lucky enough to get a permanent position that I'm now able to actually think about what I want to publish. But I also don't have the same kind of, a wolf breathing down my door that I did previously. So it's such a difficult system to negotiate. And one thing that I had no idea about when I started thinking about publishing is how some publications don't matter, or who they matter for is very important to keep in mind. So while I might be disseminating work that I think is very important, if it went to the wrong journal, or if it was presented in the wrong way and it's not referable, then it won't actually contribute to me ever securing a job or funding in the future. And I think those sort of hidden requirements are really, really difficult to understand unless you have, I don't know what you would need, like the right mentors or someone guiding you throughout the entire process, which wasn't my experience, unfortunately, but yeah.
So, do you want to say something about, and you too.
I actually feel quite excited to say something, because I just want to say being rejected is normal. So that's the first thing to take away, is just and I often think, I don't know, academia seems to attract people with delicate egos, and then we've got the worst job for delicate egos because we get rejected all the time, and it's horrible. And not only do you get rejected, but then when you get something published, it's like, oh wow, I got something published. Oh, I need to get on with my next job the very next day. So it's just really hard. I want to tell you a couple of stories. My book from my PhD, the publishers took 1 year to think about whether they would accept it or not, and then turned it down. And then I found out that they'd given something very similar to 3 male professors who were doing a similar topic. I'm a young female, I didn't get it. But my book got published with Routledge and has sold much more in the long term. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you, there was another rejection that I got, and this probably won't come as a shock to someone like Chi, but with his story, but I wrote it with a male professor, and I'm still a young female academic. They wrote back to him, not to me. So I submitted it in my name first, and they wrote back to him. So what I want you guys to take from this is, by then I was really pissed off, and I messaged him separately. Now, he didn't back down, he didn't apologise, nothing. But what I want you all to take away from this is, I think, if you get a rejection like that, I would go to that journal's about how they describe themselves. If they say things like, the review process looks like this, we welcome submissions from people like this, go back to them. Go back and complain and say, this is what I got, this is not acceptable. This is one. You don't have to be rude or snotty, but you do have a right to say, especially if you can quote back their words and say, look, you claim to do this and you claim to do that. And then I was telling Alex earlier that you can also ask, when you submit a paper, you can ask for people not to be sent to certain people. So if you know that there are people who really, for some reason, maybe you've had some personal clash or political issues with, you can ask in a message when you submit. So just some tips there.
Yeah. But you know that the last one, it can also sometimes, I have heard these stories. So this is about, opposing reviewers. So there is a section in many of the journals where you can write names of reviewers that you wouldn't want your work to be sent out. But I have known editors who actually end up sending to them. I know, academia is a very diabolic place.
It is.
I'm not sure whether that really works. But about desk rejects, and I think it's one thing about rejections, where comments, you get comments, and there is this more brutal reject, which is the desk reject, where it doesn't even go out for review, but they just don't. And from my experience, actually, any form of rejections have been, it has only, I would say, made my resolve to get it published much more stronger. So, whenever I get a rejection, and this, of course, I've trained myself, I immediately send it on the same night to another journal. So, I think this kind of infidelity, intellectual infidelity, is very important it's a coping strategy, and it has mostly worked very well for me. So, so that's also something, do not be disheartened and just have a thick skin and just kind of slut around your paper till it gets published. Yeah.
Can I link this just with a couple of sentences with reviewing process? I got a rejection 2 days ago from a main journal. Still thinking about it, but it does affect us quite much. But as Tannistha says, it's a way of thinking about your work again. Not in those cases, not, it's clearly brutal, not when, they reject something just based on context or whatsoever, but both from editors' feedbacks and reviewer feedbacks, we can learn some stuff. And also one of the very important ways to finalize a journal article, I would say, is to respond to reviewers in a certain way. So it's always good to have some feedback from some mentors or maybe from your friends to incorporate the feedback that you are having, and also showing how you've done that through some tables and through formulating it in a certain way. We can talk about it a bit later if you want to, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So is it okay if I kind of respond to a variety of points that have been raised in the discussion? Yeah, okay, thanks. So I feel like I'm responding a little bit with two hats. So there's, the hat that I wear as a journal editor, and then there's the hat that I'm wearing as a scholar more broadly. So I think, particularly in response to some of the comments, sorry, I've forgotten your name, the comments that you raised, I think as an early career scholar, there is a game that you're playing, right? But I think you do need to be selective about what game do you want to play. Because if you choose to play the game that is entirely what the neoliberal university wants you to do, I would assume by the fact that you're in this room at this conference, you're probably going to be quite an unhappy person. And so I think you do need to be strategic, and I think what's useful about the input is that we've had, which is some of the non-traditional forms of publishing, like the research notes. And some of those things can often be, I'm not saying they're easy, right? So easy wins in inverted commas, but they often can be, and I think because they tend to be shorter pieces, but they're still normally peer-reviewed, you're getting that kind of exposure to what the system is. And I think part of this is also, and I do not want to seem patronising when I say this, but and hopefully this doesn't come across this way, but I think choosing where to publish is really important, not in terms of the metrics and, you know, what's high impact and what's refable, but I think it is about thinking about journals are run by people. And who those people are will be sort of indicative of the kind of publishing processes. So as well as looking at the sort of the journal aims and scopes, I think it is also looking at the editorial board. So for example, I wouldn't publish personally in an editorial, in a journal that has an editorial board that entirely comes from one country. Because there's no way they're going to understand my scholarship, right? So those kinds of clues as to where is the kind of home that I'm likely to kind of find homes for my research, and I think that's really, really important. With that said, I would say, so just, I think coming to desk rejects, and so I had to desk reject an article recently that did come from an early career scholar, and it was a very difficult decision to desk reject it. And the reason that I decided to desk reject it in the end was, although there was huge promise in the empirical material within the article, the more theoretical elements weren't quite there yet. And I knew that if I sent this out for peer review, that was definitely what the peer reviewers were going to come back with. And I consulted with other editors, and their advice was to desk reject at that point, but to give that feedback, like, this is why we're rejecting, and to encourage, look, if you can work on this, we would love to see this in a kind of different format. But part of the reason that we did that was thinking about when we can already see that gap in the paper, it's what peer reviewers are likely going to come back with as well, and that could actually be a rougher journey for the person getting the feedback than us kind of making the more early intervention to go, we see this gap, this is maybe something that you can work on. And I think maybe the last thing I would say, that in terms of getting all the negative peer review feedback that makes assumptions about the positionalities of authors and creates hierarchies of whose knowledge has to be explained in particular ways. I think Karen's point about sometimes it is important to go back to editors, because part of my role as an editor is also to review the feedback that comes through peer review. So by way of example, recently I had to go back to a peer reviewer because they'd used the word native English in terms of feedback to a scholar. Now, I agreed that there was more editorial work to be done in terms of just proofing and some overall sentence construction, but the term native English is very loaded and was making assumptions about the positionality of the author. And so that, you know, that was something I felt was important to do. Not all editors do that, and they should be doing that. That is part of their role. But again, that's why I think it's important to really consider who is running the journals. And yeah, because it obviously is influential. And I can also say the reason why book reviews don't happen so much is because publishers aren't publishing the books in hard copy format, so people don't actually get physical books. So people are less wanting to do them. And also, to be honest with you, it's a lot to do with journal metrics, which is another whole big scenario. I don't know where this needs to go.
So I also wanted to quickly, maybe, Karine and Karen, I'm sorry, to kind of go back to you, about, non-English speaking authors, and because that's also, especially, sociological writing is also a craft that one develops during their academic journey, and I can clearly see, how mine has changed. And as someone who, acquired English as a foreign language, the academic writing is very different than what we speak. So, and I know that some journals, including the Sociological Review, are very sympathetic towards authors, and they're ready. The editors, the editorial assistants, and even some of the journals that I co-edited, we have been very sympathetic, where some of us have sat down and, changed the grammar and done stuff like that. But in this kind of a publishing rat race, I think it's also naive to expect that top journals are going to be doing that. So then, the question is, how do we go around that? Because it's a major issue I can see in some of the top journals, especially journals which are more quantitative in nature, where they expect, a quicker turnaround. So they really don't have to sit with the authors or work with the authors for 2-3 iterations, right? So then, what happens to early career scholars or scholars more generally who, whose first language is not English, right? So my advice, and I'll be happy to, get your advice, because I'm sure that's a question which, many of you might have, is to, now of course there is AI and, and AI-assisted technologies, which of course is like, I don't know, because it really helps to make those changes and acknowledge that, one has used those technologies to kind of, sharpen or make the flow better. But I also recommend, if it's available in your university setting, to use the writing centers. I know that this suggestion has worked for many of the authors who have been publishing with journals that I have associated with, and they have found it useful to work closely with, because sometimes, like you said, the theoretical provocations, which are more difficult to articulate, kind of become weak, and although the empirical material shows a lot of promise, sometimes we have to desk reject articles where this is not developed. So I think the writing part of it is very crucial in this business of academic writing. So I think writing centers are great places, and I know that most scholars do not use those effectively, but that's just my suggestion. But I don't know whether you have any other suggestions. Yeah.
This is not so much a suggestion, but hopefully just something that acts as inspiration. The paper that won best, I forget what the formal title is, but best paper in the Sociological Review of last year was a paper that went through, I believe I think it was close to 4 or 5 rounds of peer review, and was also written by a scholar who uses English as an additional language. And the reason that it went through so many rounds of peer review was not as a punishment, but was because we saw value, but we also saw the need for further development. So I think the message that I'm trying to send is to not also be disheartened when those reviews come, because in some ways, good critical peer reviewing is actually the highest compliment you can get. Right? Somebody has spent time reading your work and reflecting on it and thinking of ways in which it can be improved. And that is peer review at its best. Now, often we don't experience peer review in that way, but that's what it should be. So getting that level of engagement from people is actually a compliment, even though it often doesn't feel like it at the time. And maybe just an anecdote. So I recently was desk rejected from a journal, from a British journal, and my article was about the intricacies of doing decolonial work as a Global North trained, Global South based scholar, and the particular positionality I was at that time. And the editor who dealt with it also frames themselves as a decolonial scholar, and their desk reject asked me to cite a white man because my paper didn't do that. It was foregrounding women and women of colour in South Africa, but also Indigenous scholars in Australia and New Zealand. And while the person they'd suggested that I cite was, excellent work, I have no gripes with this particular scholar, it also felt like it missed the point of what the work was trying to do. So also just to, like other people who are doing, normalise the rejection, like it does happen to us all. Well, to be honest with you, my answer was to get on WhatsApp and complain to my friends. But also, interestingly, the suggestion about where to send it was actually very useful. So while I was slightly annoyed about what citation I was being asked to think about, There was a very useful suggestion on where they thought it would be better placed, and interestingly, other people I spoke to all came back independently with the same suggestion. So sometimes these things can help.
Yeah. So I think we are done with the time, yeah. But you know, I mean, is there tea or something after this? There's a break.
There's a break now. If you'd like to carry on the conversation down in
okay.
Mickey's
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Thank you so much for all your questions. I hope this was marginally useful.